The sun rose slowly over the wide fields, spreading a golden light over the farmhouse and the land surrounding it. The farmhouse was old, with wooden beams and a roof that had seen many storms, but it had a warmth that made anyone who entered feel at home. The small village nearby often looked at the farmhouse and the woman who lived there and thought of her as ordinary. They saw her as a farmer's wife, busy with her daily chores, rising early in the morning, and working until the sun went down. Nobody knew the secret that lived quietly behind the doors of her simple home. Every morning, she started her day like clockwork. She would step out of her small bedroom and pull on her worn boots. The smell of the fresh earth mixed with the aroma of the bread baking in the oven greeted her. She would open the barn doors and let the animals out. Chickens clucked and fluttered about, eager for their morning feed. Cows waited patiently to be milked. Horses stamped their hooves softly, impatient but loyal. She moved among them with a gentle strength, speaking softly as she worked, her hands skilled from years of care and labor. It was not easy work, the kind of work that made your muscles ache and your hands calloused. But she did it without complaint. It was her life and she knew it well. Yet, beyond the farm and the fields, there was another side to her. A side that nobody in the village ever saw. In the corner of the living room, pushed slightly to the left, sat an old piano. It was not fancy. Its black paint had chipped in several places, and some of the keys were slightly yellowed with age. But to her it was a treasure. It had been there for as long as she could remember, given to her family by someone who believed that music could heal the soul. She had learned to play it in secret, teaching herself by ear, listening carefully to music from a small old radio. Her fingers danced across the keys, making melodies that carried her away from the chores and the fields. Music was her escape, her hidden joy, a place where the outside world could not touch her. She often played late into the night. The moon would rise high, casting silver light through the windows, and the farm would grow quiet except for the soft notes of her piano. Sometimes, she would close her eyes, letting the music flow freely. Other times, she would hum along, letting her voice blend with the melody. It was a small ritual, simple and private, yet it gave her a kind of happiness she could not find anywhere else. The farm was her duty, but the piano was her dream. The two parts of her life seemed so different, yet they belonged together, each giving meaning to the other. On this particular morning, she had finished feeding the animals and was walking back toward the farmhouse. The air was fresh and crisp, with the smell of damp soil and wildflowers carried on the wind. She paused for a moment, looking out over the fields. The crops were growing tall and strong, bending slightly under the morning breeze. She had planted them herself, day by day, nurturing them just as she nurtured everything in her life. Her hands brushed against the tips of the leaves, feeling the life in them. It was hard work, but it was rewarding. There was a pride in seeing the land flourish under her care, a quiet satisfaction in knowing she had made it grow. Inside the farmhouse, the kitchen smelled of fresh bread and coffee. She moved to prepare breakfast, humming a tune that had been lingering in her mind since she woke. As she worked, she thought about the little things she had to do today. There was always something to fix, something to clean, something to prepare. Yet, even in the midst of the busy day, her mind wandered back to the piano. The thought of sitting down later and letting the music take over made her smile. It was a small promise she made to herself, a moment of peace before the world demanded her attention again. The village nearby was just starting to wake up. Smoke rose from chimneys, and the faint sound of footsteps on gravel roads carried through the air. She knew the neighbors well enough to greet them when she passed, but most of them only saw her as the farmer's wife. They did not know her love for music. They did not know about the hours she spent learning melodies, practicing scales, and perfecting songs that could make anyone who heard them stop and listen. That part of her life was hidden, quiet, and safe. It was hers alone. Her husband was already out in the fields working with the plow. He was a strong man, used to the rhythm of farm life. They worked together in silence often, understanding each other without needing words. But even he did not know the depth of her musical talent. They had never spoken of it. She had never shown him. The farm required every hour of their day, and she had learned to keep her secret close. Yet, sometimes, when she watched him take a break and wipe the sweat from his brow, she thought about what it would be like if he ever heard her play. She smiled quietly to herself and shook her head. Perhaps one day. The morning moved slowly, filled with small, ordinary moments. She swept the kitchen, washed the dishes, and checked on the animals again. Each task was simple, repetitive, yet necessary. She moved through them with a rhythm that mirrored the music she would play later. Even in work, she found a kind of melody. The soft clinking of metal tools, the gentle clatter of hooves on the barn floor, the rustle of leaves outside. Life on the farm had its own music, if only one listened closely enough. And she did listen with every part of herself. As the sun climbed higher, the farm grew warmer. The animals rested, the fields shimmered in the light, and the farmhouse stood quietly, holding its secret within. She looked toward the old piano in the living room. For a moment, she imagined herself sitting there, the notes flowing from her fingers, the music filling every corner of the room. She could almost hear the sound of applause, though she knew there was no audience yet. It was only a dream, but it was a beautiful one. It made the long, hard hours on the farm feel lighter. It gave her hope for something more, something beyond the daily grind. Then, as if the day itself wanted to remind her of the world beyond the farm, a letter arrived. It was delivered by a young boy on a bicycle, pedaling quickly down the dirt road. She opened it carefully, curious. The letter was an invitation to perform at the town's annual gathering. Her eyes widened as she read the words. She was not sure if it was a mistake. She, a farmer's wife, was being asked to play the piano in front of the whole village. The thought made her heart race. Fear and excitement swirled together in her chest. Could she do it? Could she step into a hall full of people and let them hear her play? She set the letter down and sat quietly for a moment. Her fingers itched to touch the keys. She could already feel the music in her hands, as if it were waiting for her to bring it to life. But doubt lingered too. What if she made a mistake? What if people laughed or whispered? She had played in private all her life. This would be different. This would be real. The piano, once a place of quiet solace, was now a bridge to the world beyond her farmhouse. She took a deep breath and looked out the window at the fields. If she had faced the challenges of the farm every day, she could face this too. Perhaps it was time to let the music speak for her, to show the world what she had kept hidden for so long. She spent the rest of the morning preparing in small ways. She polished the piano keys until they shone, dusted the edges of the instrument, and adjusted the bench so it was just right. Every detail mattered. Every note she would play mattered. She imagined herself walking into the hall, sitting down, and letting the music flow naturally. It was a terrifying thought, but also thrilling. She realized that the piano had been waiting for this moment all along, and perhaps she had been waiting for it too. By the time the sun reached its peak, she felt a mix of nervousness and anticipation. The farm had taught her patience, resilience, and the value of quiet work. The piano had taught her emotion, expression, and the courage to dream. Now, these lessons were coming together in a way she had never imagined. The journey from the fields to the piano bench seemed like a small step, yet it was the first step toward something extraordinary. She paused for a final moment before leaving the farmhouse. The animals were settled, the chores completed for now, and the air was calm. She looked around her small home, feeling a strange sense of pride. She had lived a simple life, hidden her talent, and nurtured her dream quietly. But soon the world outside would hear her. And when they did, perhaps they would see that even the most ordinary lives could hold extraordinary secrets. Perhaps they would see her not just as a farmer's wife, but as a musician, a dreamer, and someone capable of surprising them all. With a deep breath, she picked up the letter once more, tucked it safely in her pocket, and stepped out the door. The fields stretched before her, bright and alive under the afternoon sun. She walked toward the road, toward the village, and toward the unknown. Each step carried her closer to a moment she had imagined for years. Each step carried the hope that her music could finally speak, not just to herself, but to everyone who was about to hear it. And in that quiet determination, something remarkable was beginning. The day passed slowly, yet the thought of the upcoming performance filled her mind constantly. She moved about the farmhouse with an unusual energy, as if every action carried more meaning than usual. Chores that once felt routine now seemed like small preparations for something bigger. She swept the floors with extra care, washed the dishes as if polishing them would somehow polish her courage, and even arranged the kitchen table in neat lines, as though order could calm her racing heart. Every little task became a meditation, a way to focus her thoughts and quiet the nervousness that refused to leave. She thought about the hall where the performance would take place. It was the center of the village, a large building that had seen celebrations, meetings, and even small plays. She remembered the sound of her own footsteps echoing in empty rooms when she had been there once to deliver bread for the village fair. It had seemed so big then, almost overwhelming, and now it would be the stage where she would reveal the part of herself she had kept hidden for so long. The thought was exciting, but it also made her stomach twist. Could she really play well in front of people? Could she transform the quiet melodies she had practiced alone into something that others would feel? Her mind kept returning to the notes of the piece she intended to play. It was a song she had loved for years, one she had played hundreds of times in the solitude of her living room. Each note carried emotion, memories, and a tiny fragment of her heart. She ran her fingers over the edges of the piano keys, imagining the sounds they would make when the room was filled with people's ears and eyes. The anticipation was strange, almost electric. For so long, her music had been just hers. Now it would belong to others as well. She thought about the villagers and their quiet opinions of her life. They saw her as a simple farmer's wife, nothing more, nothing less. They knew the rhythm of her days and assumed they knew the limits of her world. They did not know that behind the closed doors of her home, she could summon emotion from a row of keys and transform the air into something alive. She smiled at the thought of surprising them, not out of pride, but because she had longed for someone to witness the music she carried within. She imagined their astonishment, their wide eyes, the pause as they realized what they were hearing. She could almost feel it, and it warmed her heart. Still, doubt crept in. She pictured herself sitting at the piano, her hands trembling, the audience waiting in silence. What if she made a mistake? What if she froze? The fear of embarrassment pressed down on her, heavier than any physical labor she had done on the farm. She had faced storms, hard work, and long hours, but this was different. This was the judgment of people who would not know the effort and practice behind every note. Yet, even as fear gnawed at her, determination grew stronger. She had dreamed of this moment quietly for years. She would not let fear steal it from her. Her preparation became almost ritualistic. She played through her song slowly, key by key, listening to every tone and harmony. She repeated passages that were difficult, practicing until her fingers remembered the movement even when her mind doubted. She hummed the melody, imagining the way the room would carry the sound, the way the walls would echo her music. She rehearsed silently as well, picturing herself smiling softly, sitting tall at the piano, commanding each note without hesitation. Each repetition strengthened her resolve. Each careful touch of the keys reminded her that she was ready for this moment. As afternoon passed into evening, she took a walk through the fields. The light of the sun softened, painting the land in warm colors. She walked slowly, taking deep breaths of fresh air, letting her mind clear. The natural rhythm of the farm, the sway of the crops, the chirping of birds, the rustle of leaves in the breeze, helped her find a calmness she could not create indoors. She thought of the performance once more, letting the wind carry away some of the fear and filling her instead with quiet courage. By the time she returned to the farmhouse, she felt a little lighter, more ready to face the challenge ahead. That night she did not sleep well. Her mind replayed the melody over and over, fingers moving almost on their own as if they remembered the song better than she did. She imagined herself in the hall, imagining the faces of the villagers turning toward her, waiting for the first note. She imagined the silence as she began, the music filling the room and holding everyone's attention. She imagined the surprise, the awe, and the slow realization that she was not just a simple farmer's wife. Her heart pounded, a mixture of excitement and anxiety, yet sleep came in short bursts, leaving her restless but determined. The morning of the performance arrived quickly. She awoke before sunrise, the sky already beginning to glow with a soft light. She moved quietly through the farmhouse, careful not to wake the animals too early. She dressed simply but neatly, choosing clothes that allowed her to move freely at the piano. She tied her hair back, washed her hands, and paused for a moment to breathe. Today was the day. Everything she had prepared for, every quiet hour spent with the piano, every note practiced alone, led to this moment. She carried a quiet pride, knowing she had worked for this chance with all her heart. When she arrived at the hall, she found it buzzing with activity. Villagers were setting up chairs, arranging decorations, and preparing refreshments for the event. The hall smelled faintly of polished wood and fresh paint. She noticed familiar faces, neighbors who had always thought of her as ordinary, busy women who barely lifted their heads to notice anything outside their routine lives. Now they would see her in a new light. She felt a tiny thrill at the thought, her hands clenching and unclenching nervously. She had come prepared, yet she could not help but feel the weight of expectation pressing down. The stage waited, a small platform in the center of the hall, with the old piano standing proudly upon it. She approached it carefully, running her fingers over the smooth, slightly worn keys. She could almost hear the song already, the notes waiting patiently for her to bring them to life. She adjusted the bench, checking the height and distance, ensuring that every movement would be natural and comfortable. The piano, which had been her companion in private moments, now felt like a bridge to the world. It was more than an instrument. It was a doorway to her dreams. As she prepared, she noticed the audience beginning to gather. People chatted quietly, unaware of the surprise awaiting them. She saw children fidgeting in their seats, elders exchanging polite greetings, and friends whispering about their expectations. Some seemed curious, some indifferent. Nobody knew what she was about to do, and that made the moment feel electric. She felt her heart race, but also a sense of clarity. This was her moment. She had practiced, she had prepared, and she was ready. She could not let doubt or fear take it away from her now. When it was her turn, the hall grew quiet. She stepped onto the stage, carrying herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had mastered something in private. The audience turned to look, curiosity flashing in their eyes. She smiled softly, giving a small nod of acknowledgement. Then she sat at the piano. The keys were familiar beneath her fingers, yet the room felt vast, alive with expectation. She took a deep breath, feeling the music inside her waiting to escape. With one gentle motion, she began to play. The first notes floated through the hall like a soft breeze. People turned, surprised by the beauty and precision of the sound. It was delicate, yet confident, simple, yet full of emotion. The melody carried stories, of quiet mornings on the farm, of long hours spent working, of dreams kept close to the heart. The villagers listened, some with their mouths slightly open, some leaning forward in disbelief. The sound was so pure, so moving, that it seemed to fill every corner of the room. They had expected ordinary, but this was extraordinary. She continued, her fingers moving effortlessly over the keys, her heart in every note. The music rose and fell, gentle and strong, weaving emotion into every corner of the hall. People who had doubted her found themselves captivated. Eyes widened, hands clasped together, and whispers turned into awed silence. She was no longer just the farmer's wife they had known. She was a musician, a storyteller, and a magician, creating a world with her music that held everyone in its spell. The fear that had gripped her moments before was gone, replaced by a deep, radiant joy. As the song came to its final notes, the hall was completely silent for a heartbeat. Then, the applause began, slow at first, then rising like a wave, filling the room with sound. People stood, clapped, cheered, and some even wiped tears from their eyes. The astonishment on their faces was real, sincere, and it warmed her more than she could have imagined. She had done it. She had shared her music, her soul, and her hidden talent, and the world had listened. In that moment, the ordinary life she had known and the extraordinary music she carried inside came together in a beautiful, unforgettable harmony. After the applause of her first notes in her mind, she left the farmhouse early the next morning to continue preparing for the performance. She knew that talent alone was not enough. She needed practice, patience, and confidence to bring her music to life in front of an audience that would now expect something extraordinary. The hall had already begun to feel like a stage in her mind, and every detail of it, from the creaking wooden floor to the large windows letting in the morning light, was imprinted in her thoughts. She imagined herself sitting at the piano, fingers hovering over the keys, and rehearsed how she would start, how she would breathe, and how she would carry the melody through each piece she planned to play. Back at the farmhouse, she opened the piano lid slowly, the familiar scent of old wood and polished keys greeting her like an old friend. Her hands hovered over the keys as she thought about the piece she had chosen for the audience. It was a song she had practiced countless times, one that had grown with her over the years. Each note had a memory attached, a morning spent with the birds, a quiet afternoon in the field, evenings when the stars glimmered in the sky above her farm. It was more than a song. It was a reflection of her life. She let her fingers touch the keys softly, feeling their cool surface, and began to play. The music flowed gently, sometimes hesitant, sometimes bold, mirroring the mixture of excitement and fear she felt inside. As she played, she thought about the villagers. They had seen her as quiet, hardworking, ordinary. Most of them had never imagined that beneath the simple life of chores and early mornings, there was someone who could create such beautiful music. Some people might think it strange, a farmer's wife with a talent for the piano, but she knew that beauty could be found in unexpected places. Her music was proof of that. She wanted the villagers to hear it, to feel it, to realize that even in the most ordinary life, extraordinary things could exist. But at the same time, doubt lingered. What if they did not understand? What if they dismissed her as lucky or imagined? She shook her head, reminding herself that she could only play from her heart and let the music speak for itself. She practiced in short bursts, taking breaks to walk around the farmhouse, checking on the animals, and letting her mind rest. The rhythm of farm life became a gentle companion to her music practice. The clucking of chickens, the lowing of cows, and the rustling of leaves in the fields became a background melody, something to harmonize with her own playing. She imagined combining the calm of her surroundings with the strength of her fingers, creating a performance that was both natural and powerful. Every sound, every note, and every breath mattered. She felt her confidence growing, slowly, like the crops in the field she tended every day. Despite her progress, fear never left her completely. Each day brought a mix of excitement and worry. She knew the villagers would expect something remarkable now. The letter inviting her to perform had already raised curiosity among neighbors, friends, and acquaintances. People were talking quietly about the performance, wondering who this farmer's wife was and what she could possibly play. Some expected something simple, something gentle, but she knew her music could surprise them. She felt the weight of expectation, but she also felt a new energy inside her. She was no longer practicing just for herself. She was preparing for an audience who would witness her talent for the first time. Her mind often drifted to the night before the performance. She had barely slept, replaying the melody over and over, imagining the faces of the villagers turning toward her, waiting for the first note. Now, with the performance drawing nearer, she focused on refining every detail. She practiced slowly, carefully, making sure her fingers could move without thought, allowing the music to flow naturally. She paid attention to each transition between notes, each pause, each soft or loud passage. She wanted the song to be perfect, not because perfection was expected, but because it was a reflection of her life and dedication. Sometimes, she allowed herself small moments of joy during practice. She would smile when her fingers hit the right note, laugh softly when a small mistake slipped through, and hum along with the melody when the room felt quiet enough to hold her voice. These moments reminded her why she loved music so much. It was more than talent or skill. It was a connection to something larger, something invisible yet tangible in the way her heart responded to the sound. She imagined the audience feeling the same connection, the same emotions, as if the music were speaking directly to each person, telling a story they had never heard before. The day of the performance was approaching, and with it came the tension of preparation. She gathered her sheet music, checked the condition of the piano, and rehearsed her posture at the bench. Each movement, from adjusting the bench to positioning her hands, had become a small ritual that gave her strength. She reminded herself that confidence came not only from skill but also from composure. She practiced breathing deeply before each passage, imagining herself calm, strong, and ready. She knew that the audience would feel her energy as soon as she began to play, and she wanted to project the certainty she felt inside, even if her heart raced. As evening approached, she stepped outside for a moment, taking in the sights and smells of the farm. The fields glimmered in the fading sunlight, and the air was warm and soft. She closed her eyes and let the sounds of nature fill her senses. The chirping of birds, the rustling of the leaves, and the distant lowing of cows returning to their stalls. She thought about the performance, imagining the hall filled with people, the bright light falling on the piano keys, and her fingers moving confidently across them. The thought made her heart beat faster, but also brought a strange sense of peace. She was ready. She just needed to trust herself. That night, sleep was again restless, but her dreams were filled with music. She imagined walking into the hall, the villagers watching, and sitting at the piano with ease. The notes flowed from her fingers effortlessly, carrying stories of her life, the farm, and her quiet hopes. She dreamed of the expressions on their faces as they listened, some surprised, some moved, some silent in awe. She woke in the early hours of the morning, her mind filled with the melody, and a quiet smile touched her lips. She knew that tomorrow would change everything, not just for her, but for everyone who would hear her music. The morning of the performance was calm, almost surreal. She moved quietly through the farmhouse, completing small tasks before leaving. She fed the animals, checked the garden, and made sure the house was in order. Every action was careful, deliberate, and infused with a sense of anticipation. She dressed simply, wearing clothes that allowed her to move freely at the piano, and tied her hair back neatly. She wanted nothing to distract from the music, from the story she was about to tell through the keys. With the letter safely in her pocket, she stepped out onto the road leading to the village, carrying with her a quiet determination that grew stronger with every step. The walk to the hall was filled with both excitement and reflection. She thought about how far she had come, from secret practice in the farmhouse to standing on a stage in front of her neighbors. She remembered the early mornings, the long hours of work, and the quiet nights spent playing melodies that only she could hear. All of it had led to this moment. She felt a mixture of fear and courage, but the courage was growing stronger, fueled by the music she carried in her heart. She reminded herself that she had practiced, prepared, and dreamed of this day for years. Nothing could take that from her. Arriving at the hall, she noticed people setting up chairs, arranging decorations, and preparing refreshments. The room was bright and filled with the scent of polished wood and fresh paint. She walked quietly, observing the activity, and found a corner to sit and collect her thoughts. She closed her eyes, imagining the audience, the sound of the piano, and the way her music would fill the room. Her hands rested lightly on her lap, but she could feel the energy of the coming performance thrumming beneath her skin. This was the moment she had been waiting for, a moment to show the world what she had kept hidden for so long. As more villagers arrived, she noticed their curious glances. Some recognized her from the fields, from the market, from the quiet streets of the village. They whispered to each other, wondering what she could possibly play, what this farmer's wife might offer them. She felt a strange mix of nerves and excitement. She was no longer playing for herself alone. The world would hear her music now, and that thought made her pulse quicken. She took a deep breath, letting the anticipation settle into focus. It was time to step onto the stage and let the music speak for itself. She approached the stage carefully, each step echoing softly in the hall. The piano stood waiting, familiar yet transformed by the presence of the audience. She sat down, adjusted the bench, and placed her hands on the keys. The first note would be crucial. It would set the tone, carry her confidence, and draw the audience into her world. She closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of the piano beneath her fingers and the warmth of the room around her. Then, slowly, she pressed the first key, and the music began to flow. The hall was quiet now, filled with a soft, expectant energy. People had taken their seats, whispering among themselves, curiosity and excitement mingling in the air. She walked slowly to the stage, the familiar wooden floor creaking lightly beneath her boots. Her hands trembled just slightly as she approached the piano, but she took a deep breath and reminded herself of the hours she had spent practicing. Every note she had played alone in her farmhouse, every melody she had hummed under the moonlight, had prepared her for this moment. She sat down, adjusting the bench, placing her fingers lightly on the keys. The first few seconds felt like eternity. She could hear her own heartbeat in the silence of the hall, feel it in her chest, in her arms, in her fingertips. The villagers' eyes were on her now, some polite, some curious, some skeptical. She had imagined this moment countless times, but it was more intense in reality. The stage, the bright lights, the faces watching her. Everything seemed larger than she had ever imagined. Still, the piano felt familiar beneath her hands, grounding her in a comfort that only music could provide. She pressed the first key softly. The note lingered in the air, delicate and clear. A hush fell over the hall, as if everyone was holding their breath, waiting for what would come next. She began to play, her fingers moving carefully at first, finding the rhythm, letting the music flow slowly. The melody was gentle, almost like a whisper, carrying warmth and calm through the room. Some villagers tilted their heads, surprised by the softness and precision of the sound. Others closed their eyes, letting the music reach them in ways words could never do. As she continued, her confidence began to grow. The first few notes had broken the ice, and now she allowed the music to flow more freely. Her fingers moved with ease, each note striking with clarity and emotion. She played the piece she had chosen with care, each passage full of feeling, telling a story that only she knew completely. The melody spoke of early mornings on the farm, of long days under the sun, of quiet nights filled with dreams and hopes. The audience began to feel it too, without even realizing why. The music had a way of touching hearts, of creating connection without a single word. The room grew still, the soft rustle of clothes and the faint creak of chairs the only interruption to the sound of the piano. She noticed a few villagers leaning forward, their faces focused and attentive. Some had their hands clasped, eyes wide in surprise. They had come expecting a simple, perhaps ordinary performance, but what they heard was anything but ordinary. Each note seemed to carry a part of her life, her experiences, her patience, and her quiet determination. They were hearing not just a melody, but a story, one that unfolded slowly and beautifully under her fingers. She moved into a more complex section of the piece. The notes grew richer, the rhythm more intricate, yet she played with ease, letting her fingers glide naturally across the keys. The audience reacted subtly at first, soft gasps, widened eyes, whispers of amazement. But soon, the effect became more pronounced. People who had doubted her, who had never thought much of the farmer's wife, now found themselves captivated. The melody carried an unexpected power, gentle yet commanding. The villagers felt a shift, a realization that they were witnessing something rare, something precious. Her heart swelled as she played. For the first time, she understood fully the impact her music could have on others. She had always played for herself, for the comfort it brought her, for the joy it created in quiet moments. But now, as she glanced briefly at the faces before her, she saw how deeply it could touch people. There were smiles, looks of wonder, even a few tears quietly glistening in the eyes of those who had never imagined themselves moved in such a way by a song. She felt a surge of emotion but kept her focus, letting the music guide her rather than her thoughts or nerves. Every passage told a different part of her story. Some notes were light and playful, echoing the mornings she spent with the animals, the simple joys of life on the farm. Others were deep and strong, reflecting the hard work, the challenges, and the moments when life felt heavy. She allowed herself to play fully, to let the emotion rise naturally, and the audience responded in kind. The hall seemed to vibrate with the sound, the energy of the music filling every corner, reaching every listener. Even those who had been skeptical or indifferent now found themselves leaning in, drawn to the piano and the story it carried. She paused briefly, letting a few notes linger, creating a small silence in the room. The effect was immediate. The villagers leaned forward, ears attuned to the faintest sound, hearts open to what would come next. She began again, gradually increasing the tempo, allowing the melody to soar. The music now carried a sense of anticipation and hope, reflecting the dreams she had held quietly for so long. Her fingers danced across the keys, moving with confidence and elegance, producing a sound that seemed impossible for someone who had never played for an audience before. The hall had become a space of magic, the ordinary transformed into something extraordinary. She could feel the energy from the audience, a silent communication that went beyond words. The villagers were no longer passive listeners. They were part of the music, part of the story unfolding in front of them. The piece built to a crescendo, the notes rising and falling, carrying intensity, emotion, and beauty. The music reflected her journey, from quiet practice in her farmhouse to this stage, from self-doubt to courage, from private joy to shared wonder. Every person in the hall was swept along with her, connected to the life she had lived and the talent she had nurtured in secret. Some of the villagers exchanged glances, silently acknowledging the surprise and admiration they felt. They had underestimated her, assumed she was ordinary, and now they were realizing that talent and passion could hide in the most unexpected places. A few whispered softly to their neighbors, unable to contain their amazement. The melody, gentle yet powerful, was breaking down assumptions and creating a shared moment of awe. She continued, letting the music carry her, moving effortlessly through the piece, each note a reflection of her heart, her life, and her dreams. She played the final passages with a mix of strength and delicacy, allowing the notes to linger, to resonate, to fill the room completely. Her fingers moved with a natural grace, as though they were guided by something larger than herself. The audience was completely silent, mesmerized, caught in the spell of her music. It was a moment suspended in time, where nothing existed except the piano, the hall, and the story she was telling through every sound. She felt a quiet pride, a deep satisfaction in knowing that she had shared something true and beautiful with others. When the last note faded, there was a heartbeat of silence. The hall seemed to hold its breath, reluctant to let the spell end. Then slowly applause began. A single clap, hesitant but genuine, followed by another, then another, growing louder and stronger. People stood, clapping and cheering, some wiping tears from their eyes. The astonishment on their faces was real, heartfelt, and it filled her with a joy she had never known. She had revealed herself to the world, not as a simple farmer's wife, but as a musician, a storyteller, and someone capable of creating wonder with her own hands. She rose from the bench, bowing slightly to the audience, feeling the warmth of their admiration. Faces she had known for years looked at her with new eyes, seeing not the quiet, hard-working woman from the fields, but the artist she had been all along. The applause continued, echoing in the hall, and she realized that this was more than recognition. It was connection. Her music had reached others in ways she had only dreamed of, creating a shared experience, a moment of understanding and appreciation. After the performance, villagers approached her, offering words of praise and wonder. Some could barely speak, overwhelmed by what they had heard. Others smiled widely, shaking their heads in disbelief. She accepted their admiration with quiet humility, feeling a warmth inside that had nothing to do with pride and everything to do with joy. The music she had nurtured in private had found a way to touch hearts, to inspire awe, and to create a moment that would be remembered in the village for years to come. As she left the stage, she felt a mixture of relief, happiness, and a new sense of possibility. The fear that had haunted her earlier was gone, replaced by the knowledge that she could face the world, that she could share her talent, and that her quiet dedication had created something extraordinary. The hall, once a place of uncertainty, had become a place of triumph. She had stepped out of her private world and into a moment that celebrated her skill, her passion, and her courage. Walking back through the village after the performance, she noticed the smiles and nods of people she had known for years. Their expressions were filled with surprise, admiration, and respect. Some whispered excitedly to each other, sharing their amazement at what they had just witnessed. The realization that she had astonished everyone lingered, yet she felt no arrogance, only gratitude. She had done what she had set out to do: share her music, her story, and a piece of her heart with others. And in doing so, she had transformed not only the way they saw her, but perhaps the way they saw the possibility in everyday life itself. The applause had not stopped, and yet the sound seemed not enough to express what the villagers felt. She stood beside the piano, catching her breath, her heart still racing from the intensity of the performance. Every face in the hall reflected surprise, admiration, and something deeper: wonder. They had come expecting an ordinary performance, something polite and simple, and instead, they had witnessed something extraordinary. For a moment, she simply looked at them, taking in the weight of their astonishment, letting it sink in. Some villagers were still seated, frozen with amazement, unable to speak or move. Others had risen to their feet, clapping and cheering as if they could not contain the joy and shock that her music had stirred. She noticed a few children with wide eyes, mouths slightly open, as if they were seeing magic for the first time. Even the elders, people who had lived long lives in the village and seen many performances and events, were quietly nodding, their faces reflecting a respect that felt almost sacred. She realized that her music had touched something far deeper than she had imagined. It had reached the hearts of people in a way that words alone could never do. As the crowd continued to react, she allowed herself a small, humble smile. She had expected praise, certainly, but the depth of astonishment was more than she had imagined. People who had once thought of her as a quiet, hard-working woman from the fields were now seeing her differently. They were seeing the dedication, the patience, and the countless hours she had spent in private, crafting each note, perfecting each melody. Her music had revealed the hidden strength of her life, the beauty that had always been there but unseen. A few villagers approached her cautiously, their words stumbling at first. I didn't know you could play like that," one whispered, eyes wide. Another nodded, adding, "I've never heard anything like it. You're incredible." She thanked them softly, her voice trembling slightly with the emotion of the moment. It was strange to hear such words directed at her, to know that the quiet life she had lived on the farm had produced something that could astonish so many people. Her fingers itched to return to the keys, to play again, to let the music continue to speak. But she also understood that what had just happened was enough. The message had been heard, the connection made. She walked slowly from the stage, letting the applause wash over her one last time. The hall seemed to buzz with a new energy. People whispered to each other, sharing their amazement, exchanging looks that said more than words ever could. Some still shook their heads in disbelief, as if they could not quite process what they had just witnessed. Others smiled broadly, inspired by the courage it took to step onto the stage and reveal something so personal and beautiful. She realized that in that moment, she had not only shared her music but had also shared herself. The woman behind the farm, the quiet hours of practice, the dreams held close for so long. Stepping outside into the fresh air, she felt a mixture of relief and joy. The village was quiet now, the murmurs of conversation floating on the wind as people left the hall or lingered to speak in small groups. She could hear the distant clatter of tools and animals returning to their stalls, the rhythm of life outside the performance continuing as always. Yet, something had changed. She felt lighter, as if a burden she had carried in secret had been lifted. The music that had lived in her farmhouse for years now belonged, in a sense, to the world. And the world had responded with wonder and respect. She walked slowly through the village streets, noticing familiar faces now seeing her in a new light. People she had passed daily without much thought now smiled warmly, some nodding in quiet acknowledgement, others stopping briefly to speak. They asked her questions not about the chores she did or the farm she tended, but about the music, about the piano, about how she had learned. Each question reminded her that the performance had created something lasting, a bridge between her private life and the wider world. She had shared her hidden talent, and it had been received not with judgment, but with awe. The realization of her own impact began to settle in as she walked. She thought about the hours she had spent practicing, the nights when she had felt alone at the piano, wondering if anyone would ever hear her music. Now, she understood that those quiet moments had not been wasted. They had prepared her for this day, for this performance, for the astonishment of an audience who had not expected what she had to offer. The journey from private practice to public recognition felt surreal, but also deeply satisfying. She had discovered that the courage to share oneself, even in the smallest ways, could create moments of profound connection. As she returned to her farmhouse, the sun was beginning to set, painting the fields in shades of gold and amber. She paused at the edge of the garden, looking out over the land she had tended for years. It felt different now, not because the farm had changed, but because she had faced a fear, revealed a hidden part of herself, and witnessed the effect it could have on others. The ordinary life she had lived had produced something extraordinary, and she understood now that talent and courage could exist quietly, waiting for the right moment to shine. Inside, she approached the piano once more, running her fingers lightly over the keys. The memory of the performance, the sound of the applause, and the astonished faces of the villagers lingered in her mind. She allowed herself a few moments to play freely, without thought of perfection or audience, letting the music flow as it always had in the quiet of her home. But now it felt different. The piano was no longer just a private companion. It was a bridge, a way to connect with people, to share stories, and to express emotions that words could not capture. The keys responded to her touch, familiar yet alive with new meaning. She thought about the villagers again, imagining their faces, their reactions, and their quiet wonder. She realized that her music had done more than entertain. It had inspired. It had shown them, in a small but meaningful way, that extraordinary things could exist in ordinary lives. That quiet determination, dedication, and passion, even when unseen, could create moments that left a lasting impression. The realization filled her with warmth and gratitude, a deep sense of purpose she had not felt before. For the first time, she began to imagine what could come next. Invitations to perform, perhaps, or the chance to share her music with other villages. But more than that, she thought about the possibility of continuing to play for herself and others, letting her passion guide her. The applause had been thrilling, the astonishment humbling, but the true reward was the understanding that her talent had value, not just for herself, but for the people who had witnessed it. That understanding gave her a quiet strength, a feeling that she could carry with her into every part of her life. The next few days were filled with conversations, quiet and amazed, with neighbors and friends who approached her carefully, still processing what they had seen. Some spoke of how beautiful the music had been, others asked about her practice, and a few simply shook their heads in disbelief. Each interaction reminded her of the bridge she had created between her private world and the world outside. It was a bridge built with patience, dedication, and courage. A bridge that would continue to inspire, long after the echoes of her notes had faded from the hall. She returned to her daily life on the farm, but nothing felt quite the same. The chores, the animals, the fields, they were familiar, but now they carried a new rhythm. She moved with the confidence of someone who had faced fear and shared something deeply personal, and the knowledge that she had amazed others lingered in every action. Even the animals seemed to sense it, their calm presence a reminder of the simple joys that balanced her extraordinary experience. Her music had changed not only the village but also her understanding of herself, revealing the courage, passion, and talent she had always carried quietly within her. At night, she would sit at the piano once more, playing freely, letting the music fill the farmhouse. But this time, the sound carried a new resonance. It was informed by the experience, by the astonishment of the villagers, and by the understanding that her music could touch hearts far beyond the walls of her home. She played with confidence, with joy, and with the quiet pride of someone who had faced the world and shared herself fully. The notes rose and fell like the fields outside, steady and alive, carrying stories, emotions, and the essence of a life that had always been ordinary, yet capable of extraordinary moments. She knew the performance would be remembered by the villagers for a long time. They would talk about the farmer's wife who sat at the piano and astonished everyone in the hall. They would recall the emotion in her music, the skill in her fingers, and the courage it took to step forward and share something so personal. And she would carry the memory too, a reminder that talent, dedication, and quiet passion could create moments of awe, connection, and inspiration. The ordinary could indeed become extraordinary when someone had the courage to share what lay hidden within. After the performance, the farmhouse felt unusually quiet, though the stillness was comforting rather than empty. She moved slowly through the rooms, letting her mind replay the events of the past few days. The astonishment of the villagers, the applause that had not seemed to end, and the wide-eyed wonder of those who had never imagined such talent existed in their own community. All of it lingered in her thoughts. She felt a deep sense of gratitude for the opportunity, but also a quiet pride. She had faced fear, shared something profoundly personal, and had been met with genuine admiration. It was a rare gift and she knew it. Over the next few days, word of her performance spread beyond the hall and into the village and surrounding areas. People who had not been present at the event came to speak with her, eager to understand more about the woman who had captivated an audience with nothing but her piano and her passion. Farmers and shopkeepers, neighbors she had passed daily without much notice, now approached her with respect and curiosity. They asked questions about her music, about how long she had practiced, and even if she planned to perform again. Each conversation reminded her of the impact she had made, not through fame or showmanship, but simply by sharing the talent she had nurtured quietly for years. Visitors were cautious at first, unsure how she would respond to the attention. But her demeanor was calm, gracious, and humble. She listened carefully to their questions and comments, answering sincerely, never boasting but never diminishing her achievement either. She realized that her music had created something greater than admiration. It had created connection. People felt seen and inspired, and in turn, she felt a profound sense of belonging and purpose. Her life on the farm had always been fulfilling in its own way, but now it carried an added depth, a recognition that her private passion could touch others deeply. Her routine began to shift subtly. While she continued her chores, tending to animals and fields as she always had, she also allowed herself time to practice and explore new melodies. She found that her music flowed more freely now, unburdened by the anxiety she had felt before the performance. The piano in the farmhouse became a space not only for personal expression, but also for preparation for future moments where she might share her gift again. She experimented with different songs, some familiar, some new, discovering variations and emotions she had never explored in private. Each note seemed more vibrant, more alive, carrying the memory of the hall, the applause, and the astonished faces. People in the village began to see her differently. Children who had once barely noticed her now watched her with quiet admiration, sometimes stopping by to listen when she played in the farmhouse. Neighbors greeted her warmly, sharing not just words, but also the subtle acknowledgement of her extraordinary talent. Even those who had initially doubted her found themselves inspired by her dedication and humility. She realized that her courage had created a ripple effect. Her music had shown others the value of quiet talent and persistence, the way beauty could be nurtured patiently and revealed at the right moment. One afternoon, a visitor arrived from a nearby village. They had heard about the performance and wanted to see the woman who had astonished an entire hall with her piano. She welcomed them cautiously, unsure of what to expect, but her nerves were calmer than they might have been a month ago. When she played, the visitor listened with wide eyes, clearly moved by the skill and emotion in every note. Afterward, they thanked her sincerely, offering words of encouragement and expressing hope that she would perform for more people in the future. She felt a warm satisfaction, a recognition that her music could continue to create moments of connection far beyond the walls of her home village. The days passed gently, with the rhythm of farm life continuing as always, yet underlined now with a new sense of purpose. She played each morning and evening, her fingers moving naturally across the keys, her heart guiding the flow of the music. The piano had become a companion in a different way than before. It was a bridge between her inner world and the community, a medium through which she could express thoughts and feelings too deep for words. Each song she played carried not only the melody but also a part of her story, the quiet moments of hope, the years of practice, and the courage it had taken to step into the light. Occasionally, she revisited the hall where she had performed. The space now held a special significance. It had been the place where her private dreams had met the public eye, where her music had bridged the gap between ordinary life and extraordinary recognition. When she entered the hall, she felt the echo of the applause still lingering, the memory of astonished faces reminding her that what she had shared had lasting meaning. Sometimes, she would play quietly when the room was empty, letting the sound resonate and imagining the villagers' reactions once more. Each note became a reminder of her journey, a quiet celebration of courage and persistence. Her family and those close to her noticed a change as well. There was a new lightness in her step, a warmth in her smile, and a quiet confidence in her presence. They saw how deeply the performance had touched her, how it had validated years of quiet dedication and unspoken dreams. Conversations at home often included discussions of music, new pieces she was exploring, or ideas for future performances. The farmhouse, once simply a place of daily work and routine, now felt alive with possibility and inspiration. Music had transformed her world, just as it had transformed the perception of those around her. She also reflected on the lessons she had learned through the experience. The journey had not been easy. Fear, doubt, and nerves had accompanied every step of preparation, but the outcome had been worth every challenge. She realized that courage was not the absence of fear, but the willingness to act despite it. Talent alone was not enough. It required persistence, practice, and the readiness to share what one held within. The astonishment of the villagers had been gratifying, yes, but the true reward had been the realization that her music could inspire, comfort, and connect people in profound ways. In quiet moments, she sometimes thought about what might have happened if she had never taken the chance to perform. She imagined the piano sitting unused, the melodies trapped within the walls of the farmhouse, unheard and unshared. The thought made her grateful that she had chosen to face her fear. The decision to play had changed not only the way others saw her but also the way she saw herself. She had discovered that ordinary lives could contain extraordinary moments, that talent could thrive quietly and reveal itself with astonishing impact when the time was right. Her reputation continued to grow subtly. Villagers began to invite her to play at local gatherings, festivals, and celebrations. She accepted selectively, preferring events where her music could be appreciated without pressure. Each performance was unique, bringing new challenges, new experiences, and new reactions. But no matter the setting, she carried the calm confidence she had discovered in that first hall. Her fingers moved freely, her heart guided the melody, and her music spoke with authenticity and emotion. Each performance reinforced what she had learned, that courage, preparation, and passion could create moments of beauty that resonated deeply with others. One afternoon, as she played in her farmhouse, a group of children gathered quietly outside the window, listening intently. Their eyes were wide with wonder, and she felt a gentle joy in knowing that her music could inspire them as it had inspired others. After she finished, they clapped softly, some of them even attempting to imitate the notes she had played. She laughed gently, waving to them, feeling a sense of continuity, The idea that music could travel, inspire, and awaken curiosity and passion in others, even the youngest among them. It was a quiet form of legacy, something that would linger far beyond any single performance. In the evenings, she sometimes played for herself alone, letting her fingers explore new melodies without thought of audience or applause. These moments were her sanctuary, a place where she could experiment, reflect, and dream. She often thought about the journey that had brought her here, the early mornings, the long hours, the doubts and the fears, and finally, the courage to play before others. Each note carried memory and emotion, a reminder of how far she had come and how deeply music had transformed her life. It was a private joy that complemented the public astonishment she had received, balancing the two worlds she now inhabited with grace. As months passed, she continued to grow both as a musician and as a person. She explored new pieces, practiced regularly, and even began composing small original melodies inspired by the life around her. The farm, the animals, the fields, and the village all became part of her music, giving it a unique character that reflected her world. People who had known her for years now saw her not just as a farmer's wife, but as an artist, someone who had discovered the power of courage and dedication, and who had transformed ordinary moments into extraordinary experiences. Looking back, she understood that the astonishment of that first audience had been only the beginning. The true impact lay in the connections she had made, the inspiration she had sparked, and the confidence she had gained. Music had shown her that ordinary lives could hold extraordinary potential, that hidden talent, nurtured quietly and shared bravely, could transform both the giver and the listener. It had reminded her that courage was essential, that preparation mattered, and that beauty could flourish in the most unexpected places. Finally, as the sun set over the farm one evening, painting the fields in golden light, she sat at the piano and played a gentle, flowing melody. The music rose and fell, echoing softly through the farmhouse and out into the fields. She smiled, her heart full, knowing that she had discovered something precious. She had faced fear, shared her gift, and touched the lives of those around her. And in doing so, she had found a deeper connection to herself, her music, and the world. The farmer's wife who had once been quiet, unnoticed, and ordinary had become someone whose music could astonish, inspire, and endure. It was a quiet triumph, a lasting joy, and a story she would carry forever.